All right, so we are ready to get started. All right, so this week I'm really excited for the talk we're going to have. It's going to be a little bit different than what we have had in some other weeks, where we're talking about, a specific original research article. But that means, honestly, it may be a little more broadly useful for many of us. So this week we're having Andreza present to us. Andreza is a master's student here at the State University of Amazonas, working with the group at FMT and LePesky. And she is going to present to us some of the challenges that we have with data sharing and publication of qualitative research. If any of you guys have prepared for data sharing, have dealt with a submission of an article in this area of work, you probably already understand some of the challenges, but also some of the benefits. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andreza. Please welcome. And if you have questions as we go along, you can put them in the chat, or we'll have some time for discussion at the end. Welcome, bem-vinda.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andreza. Good morning to all. And I'm gonna try to So today in our qualitative, we will discuss the article Promises and Pitfalls of Data Sharing in Qualitative Research. This is an article from Alexander Tsai and other authors. And in recent years, we've been seeing a global and irresistible movement toward open science. High-impact journals, such as those in the PLOS group, have begun implementing policies that require authors to publicly share the data behind their findings. This is fantastic for science as a whole, but there's a crucial caveat. These policies were developed almost exclusively with quantitative data in mind. They work for statistical codes and spreadsheets, but do they apply equally to the deeply contextual and subjective data of qualitative research? This is the crux of this debate raised by this article. So here we have the difference of quantitative and qualitative data. To fully understand that data sharing policies cannot simply be transplanted from one approach to another, it is crucial to visualize the fundamental difference between them. As we can see from this comparison table, the divergence begins with the very nature of the data. On one hand, we have numbers, statistics, and in the other, narratives, texts, and images. While quantitative research seeks to answer what, focusing on quantity, frequency, and the ability to generalize results, in qualitative research, we delve into why rather than how, exploring meanings, depth, and unique context. The analysis process is also radically different in statistical, replicable, and linear in quantitative research, making it relatively easy to share code and spreadsheets for verification. But in qualitative research, the process is interpretative, iterative, and potentially subjective, since it's tied to the researcher's perspective. This brings us to the relationship with the participants. In quantitative research, distance and neutrality are solved. In qualitative research, closeness and empathy are beauty, and the data are the result of this unique co-construction. And it's this combination of factors, unique, contextual, and narrative data that leads to the final crucial difference of both, with the risk of identification. Anonymizing numbers is simple. Anonymizing a person, unique life story without destroying the data means a monumental and insurmountable challenge. Therefore, to maintain the same transparency policy for both is to ignore the fact that these are fundamentally different scientific paradigms, each with its own rules, strengths, and vulnerabilities. And why are data, qualitative data, so different? The article outlines some fundamental characteristics. First, intersubjectivity that are not simply collected. They are co-constructed in the unique interaction between the researcher and participants. Second, the process is iterative. Collection and analysis is not linear. They occur simultaneously with the constantly influencing one to another. And interpretation is not just a step, it's the scientific contribution of the work itself. And finally, the context is everything. Depth and contextual detail are irreplaceable and often non-transferable. These unique characters pose a monumental ethical challenge when it comes to sharing raw data. Chief among them is the risk of identity inference, what the authors call internal confidentiality. Unlike a number in a spreadsheet, an interview transcript is full of unique details, a very specific personal narrative, a way of speaking, a cultural or geographic reference, and even with the removal of the names and location in smaller communities or specific populations, participants may recognize themselves or one another. And let's not forget, in qualitative research often details with deeply sensitive thoughts, such as violence, mental health, or stigmatized behaviors, may expose the participants. And identity leak here is not just a breach of protocol, it's a breach of trust that can cause real psychosocial harm to participants. Besides the ethical risk, there are other practical pitfalls. The workload to effectively anonymize hundreds of page transcripts is Herculean and presumes that time could be devoted to the research itself. This can create a self-censorship bias to the researcher, knowing that everything will be public may unconsciously avoid recording certain insights or more sensitive details in their field notes. The warning in the consent form about public sharing of data may discourage potential participants from participating in the study, biasing the sample. And finally, qualitative researchers may simply avoid publishing in journal with these restrictive policies, which would be a huge loss for methodological diversity in science. Well, faced with this impasse, the authors don't simply criticize, they propose a practical and intelligent solution. the use of coding fields. Instead of sharing full transcripts, the researcher would share already anonymized excerpts of text, grouped by theme or code. For example, all excerpts related to the theme stigma would be compiled into a single document. This allows other researchers to verify the coherence to the analysis, see how the codes were applied, and even identify discrepant data that didn't appear in the final article. The great advantage is that this drastically reduces the risk of identification, as the excerpts are removed from their original narrative context, maintaining the analytical richness while protecting the participant. Based on this analysis, the article concludes with concrete recommendations for science journals to adopt more sensitive and realistic policies. And they are first, accepting coding queries as a valid and sufficient form for verification and transparency. Second, require authors to report how and if consent sharing was obtained from participants. Third, have reviewers specialized in qualitative methods access these issues during the peer review process. Fourth, allow a clear mechanism for requesting not to share data when there's a strong ethical justification. And the final message is we cannot impose a single model of transparency. Policies must be adapted to the reality of each methodology. In conclusion, the article warns us that the transparency movement is valid and important, but must be implemented with intelligence and nuance. The ultimate goal must be open and ethical science. We cannot sacrifice the depth, trust, and safety of participants on the altar of thoroughly understood transparency. The debate is complex but essential to ensuring the future and integrity of qualitative research. Thank you, everybody. We're open to discuss.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andreza. So as I said, if folks have questions or comments, if anyone has any reflections to share from your own experiences with this, please feel free to comment in the chat, or you can unmute and share your thoughts with us. I have some questions, but I'll open the floor first. Okay, hearing none yet, but I will welcome your comments as we go along. I have one thing, comment, and then one question. This idea of the coding queries or summaries, I think makes sense. I've seen this done in some journals. Are there templates or models of the format that people use? Or maybe, I know one of the recommendations was to allow flexibility, but are there templates or models of how these coding queries or summaries would look? De modelos, como organizar?
No, I don't find models of the organization for that coding queries.
Sure.
But I think that the journals have one basic to how to do that.
Okay. Gotcha. And if anyone else is aware or uses any, please feel free to share. The other comment that I wanted to make is this is even arguably more important in qualitative, but perhaps equally important as in quantitative for mixed methods research, to be thinking about this question at the beginning. Too often, when we are preparing papers and starting to think about the end of a project, the question of data sharing comes up. But it's very difficult to deal with at the end without planning in the beginning. Like you said, even the consent forms. Once we've consented the patient, collected the data, there's rarely anything we can do to change what they've agreed to, or importantly, what they have not agreed to. So it's really important to be thinking about the whole life of the data, even in the proposal stage of the project, because this is becoming really important. And journals will decline to publish the paper if it doesn't allow for the data sharing that complies with their policies. All right, looks like there's a question from Noah. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the great presentation and interesting topic. And this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious if anyone knows of any papers that have studied the impact of data sharing policies on publications. And I particularly wonder if there's an impact on papers coming out of LMICs, because I think that that it's a extra difficult to share data from an LMIC, especially if it's sensitive when it's going to a journal that's perhaps based in a higher income country. I think that adds an additional kind of power dynamic into it. But I'm curious if anyone's looked at positive or negative impact in a systemic way on these policies, if journals have been looking at that, or are we just assuming that it's are we just at this point hypothesizing as to whether there might be a deleterious or advantageous impact to these policies? Thanks.
Keep asking if there's any evidence of the journal policies, las políticas dos feministas, sobre o que causa, especially with low and middle income countries. Like, what positive or negative impact have we seen from this shift in the data sharing policies? Maybe it's unknown.
It's unknown to me, and I'm curious just if anyone on the call has any idea.
Well, for example, deixa eu ver se ele quer saber impactos positivos e negativos.
Ou no geral também.
We can use the example of our researchers. Here in Manaus, we work with the participants with HIV and some dermatological sick, and it's too stigmatized to the participants speak the life story, and we share all data, full data from his discourse. So it's too difficult to make here the participants accept all we share full of this discourse, because have a lot of nuances. How can I say? Generally, the participants was affected by violence, and they don't want the family and other person know that it occurs, and they don't want to accept We have a lot of difficulties to make him, the participants, accept we share the data. So coding queries could help us to speak to the participant. No, we don't share all data. We will share only the part of that you said about HIV, not the violence. And we could be coding queries to help us to share this data.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, like on that individual level, and I hope it's really clear to everyone how this kind of example could be dangerous, because when we think about it from a quantitative perspective, we think if we remove names and other identifiers, then we've done our job for anonymization. But anonymization is not the same as de-identification. And with qualitative, as Andreza presented and is in the paper, it's much more complex. So, we can use our imagination to think how someone could be identified if we were to share, especially a whole transcript, but even, some little pieces, because once you narrow down, oh, this is a guy, he's this age, he lives in this area, this neighborhood. Oh, he's the owner of a store that specializes in stationery. Okay, if I'm from this area, I'm starting to suspect I can identify. And then he shares these personal information, which is not intended to be identified. So that's why it's so important. And I think it's key to think when we, like with Noah's question about the positive and negative impact, it points out pretty clearly to me that we remember, as Andreza said, this sharing was primarily, almost exclusively contrived with quantitative data in mind. So it becomes very difficult. That was another point I was going to make about that, but I've lost it. I might come back to it. So you wanted to add something under it?
When we try to say a word, it's only
To hide, to mask, yeah.
when we want to hide one. How can I say? I can't. So when we think in HIV in Amazon, here in Amazon, we think in Fundação de Medicina Tropical or Medicine Tropical Foundation. So when we are doing the research and we talk to a participant, we transcribe this the interview. When everyone in another place read the interview, they think in Amazon, the interview, of course, was doing in Medicine Tropical Foundation. So it's difficult to hide this information. The participant is a patient of Medicine Tropical Foundation in Amazon, and here we have only one place to do that is here.
Going back to Noah's question, I want to see if anybody else has any insight about the question, especially when we think systematically of any evidence of the positive and the negative impacts of these policies in general. And I got back to my thought that I wanted. So for quantitative research, one of the big drivers of these policies is for reproducibility and accountability, right? And we reanalyze your data to find the same result, was the thinking with a lot of these data sharing policies. If I have the raw data and I come to the same outcome. And as you said, it doesn't really work the same way in qualitative research, and we certainly would have difficulty with that without sharing the full transcripts. So I open for comments on that some more. I think it's a great question that Noah's raised. Others online have any insights?
Sorry, actually, sorry, I'm late. Hi, Andreza. I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but I read the manuscript, of course. Um, Actually, the question was about what are some of the pitfalls?
Or positive benefits, if we know if there's any, what kind of real reliable evidence do we have about these policies around data sharing impacting things. And Noah raised it particularly in low and middle income countries, or where the data originates from low and middle income countries, where there's this additional element of this power dynamic or other challenges that may exist in research science.
Yeah, I mean that goes back a little bit to the topic that we had last week or last time, right? When we talked about the translation process and how to be when we think about reproducible, how transparent can you be about those things? So do you have the original language and then the translated language? Because you probably still need to have translations. If you're saying you only do the raw data, then you're leaving it up to the next researcher to kind of say, it's up to them how to manage the data from there. Which I personally, if I'm collecting the data and I get the consent from the participants, I feel responsible for handling that with a lot of care and respect, right? So if I'm just saying, hey, here's the raw transcript and I get it out to the public, and then I have no control over how the translation is going to go, if they just kind of pick really flashy quotes that kind of sensationalize a topic and are disrespectful to the participants, right? And are taking it out of the context, especially I think in like low middle income country research. I think it's easy to open a door then for researchers who don't know the context, right? And that's where the reproducibility, I think, is you kind of really have to weigh against who is doing the research and who's handling the data.
Yeah. Thanks, Sana. Welcome. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments? I would also love to hear from folks who might have experience in what that has been in interacting with journals, or if even people who don't have experience, if you're preparing, perhaps for your own thesis or eventual work, which is going to go to publication, the unknowns that you're curious about when it comes to interacting with journals, because there's a variety of policies, there's a variety of responses that we get from journals. So I'd love to hear some of the experiences when we push back, if they are saying, we want the full raw transcripts, that's how our data policy goes, according to this editor. How do you respond, and what has been successful for some of our work researchers here? Welcome. Vou tentar português, estou aprendendo. Tem experiência de falar com as revistas sobre as políticas. Não vou compartilhar o transcrito tudo. Vou fazer assim, porque não é analisado, né? Tipo assim, tem experiência sobre isso? Ou que dúvidas tem sobre falar e negociar com as revistas sobre dados qualitativos?
dados.
Uhum,
Eu não poderia compartilhar com quem vai
uhum.
e a gente aceitou, agora aceitou.
Okay. Alicia said every time that she's, had this request for the data sharing from journals, PLOS journals in particular, you cited, and responding that this is sensitive data and we're not going to share that way, it's been accepted. So that's a good experience. Any alternative experiences shared?
Yeah, I would say this is generally the same for my experience too. We have noticed that we kind of have to use very specific language and being very clear about saying that maybe the consent form did not include the to make the full raw data set publicly available or something. Because usually, we don't consent for that, right? Because I think then also if you think about informed consent, that means for the participant to be really aware what that, basically everything that means about if you're giving your full transcript publicly away and the risks and the challenges that can come with that would be something that if you want to for it to be really informed consent, the participant really needs to be aware of what that means. So what we've done to navigate that was to, in supplementary, like in supplemental information, to basically have a coding overview and make sure that for every code and every theme, we have example quotes and make sure that we have at least one code from each participant included. So that we're saying, we have 15 participants and we have at least one quote per participant. And that usually seems to at least again give a little bit more of that credibility that they understand, it's not feasible or ethical to share the full transcript depending on the consent.
Yeah. Other experiences or comments? Anna made me think of another thing I was considering earlier when Andreza gave the example of doing the consent process with the patient and trying to explain, as Anna's pointing out, and then to inform the patient what's going to happen with the data, especially when you might have some hesitancy because a lot of us work in these sensitive areas. So I wonder if the folks from the PESCI or others online, especially people who have been personally doing the consent process with patients, have some suggestions, some advice or explaining to patients, because we also know that many of our patients are not going to have the level of education. They're not reading scientific journals day to day. So if we explain it in a way we would explain it to each other, it probably won't be well understood when we're saying we're going to remove identifying information and all that. So I'm curious if folks have some good suggestions for addressing that one-on-one with patients or patient families. Como abordar o consentimento, o que vai acontecer com seus dados, especialmente considerando o nível de educação, de alfabetização da paciente.
I think this is really hard to do here because we work in remote areas in the Amazon. We speak with indigenous people, riverine people, gold miners, and it's difficult convince them to participate in our research and ask for something beyond the participation and the research is complicated. Sometimes they give up to participate in the research just to see the audio record. I had this experience in some fields, and sometimes they don't want even take photos or speaking with the audio recording. So based on my experience, I can see this happening.
Yeah.
And also the people have a low knowledge about the scientific research, and they don't want to appear in nowhere. Yeah. So I can see this happening here, especially in remote areas. Recently, we have two research in minor
Minor.
minor in Amapá, and was a very hard field work. The gold miners didn't want to speak with them, and also there are a lot of violence, and they want to take photos. So I don't know how this can happen in the real life. Yeah. I don't know if you have some suggestion to think about, but I can see based on my experience here in Amazon, and especially in remote areas. Also about the indigenous people, it's really complicated because in the past happened a lot of research with them, so they don't receive well research. They have
Hesitancy.
yeah, they have a resistance, yeah, a resistance with us. So we have sometimes we have to spend 1 hour just speaking about the research, just speaking how is the interview, what are happening. All it's like a class about research, just to speak. And when you arrive in a village, the people look at you like a foreign,
Outsider.
outsider. Yeah. So it's really complicated negotiate this kind of share of data, because they have this impression, oh, they are here and they are speaking with us, and after this they are take our knowledge to abroad and never come back. So when you think about sharing this data, it's really complicated, especially think in this kind of people, indigenous, miners, and riverines. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really important. Are there other thoughts or experiences to share? Or answers to the question that Alicia was raising is, well, how can we improve this process? You know, you answered a little bit of how you guys have done it. Take this time. Spending an hour presenting to the community is one piece. Other thoughts?
You know, Alicia, when you were talking, that made me think about, for one, the trust, right? So I think it is a lot more challenging to build trust if you say, I will be interview you, but then I will share your interview with the world and don't protect it, right? I think that can be challenging, and it might feel kind of as if you're exploiting them, right? Of saying, all I want is your information, then I will do with it whatever I want. But I do, I wonder if there's a way to think about when you think about data ownership, right? So ideally, it can be helpful to share the interview transcript, for example, with the participants or with the communities and saying, hey, basically we typed it up for you, but here, and you can use it however you want to use it. And I think that's sometimes harder to do with individuals, but if it was, a community group or a smaller, like a research institution or something, then I think there's something to think about saying they own the data and they allow me to use it, and then they can decide however they want to share or distribute the data. So I think there is ways to think about kind of who maintains the control of the information that they are sharing, which I think is challenging and takes time and again, good relationships and relationship building. That might not be something that happens over, a one-time interview.
Yeah, it's a good point. I was making a note too about the sharing of transcripts. If we're telling them at the stage of informed consent that we will share the data that we've collected at an individual level or maybe aggregated at a community level, and making plans to return to the community as appropriate to share, a draft of the article or a presentation form of the results that were found. I know that some of the folks here have had experience in that, of coming back to them. So because we're taking something out of the community, we're extracting something which has value. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using our time to extract it. And then often, very too often, not even returning that benefit, that value that we extracted to the community. So it's important to consider that, and that's a nice way to return back the value to the community by summarizing. These are the findings that we had. Again, just like the data sharing we do with the journals, we have to be mindful of identification and the sensitive information. But to summarize what we have found for the benefit of the people who have given us that cost of spending their time sharing their vulnerability and their information.
Yeah, I think sometimes in some journals they ask for a code book. I think we can add the codes, because when we send the code, we just send it with the numbers, with the quantitative about the codes. So I think we can do a supplementary document with all these codes. I think this is possible, and don't identify the people and even the experience, because they are mixed. So it's difficult to identify, especially here we work in a hospital with tropical disease. So it's complicated because sometimes we have a diagnostic. So you can you can identify this. And sometimes we ask about the professional healthcare. So it's complicated to this, like in a full interview. So I think we can do this supplementary document with all the codes. I think it's a solution.
Yeah, it's a great solution. And it's funny because while you were saying that, Francis commented to me, I guess it's just me directly, so I'll highlight it for you guys. Francis said, we just concluded a qualitative study, and in the article, we had the coding tree, which reflects all the codes. And he said we had sufficient excerpts included in the results section, but as we discussed, no access to the transcript was shared, which was primarily managed by the team doing the analysis. And then he said too, I think a copy of the informed consent document, which is done before data collection, can often be submitted to the journal as well. Sometimes they ask for that. And that can be referenced when the journals want access to transcripts that, as Anna said, the informed consent didn't allow for that kind of data sharing.
And also, I think we have to consider the country policies, because here in Brazil, we can share the data in the ethical statement. So I think each country has something about this, but here in Brazil, we can do this.
it's not a rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a crime.
All right,
You know
any final questions or comments? Go ahead.
I was just saying, Alicia, what you said about having the, every reference to each code, right, and have that de-identified. I think that's possible, and depending on the topic, might also make sense. But if it is a really kind of complicated topic, or where the context matters in the analysis that you say, but this is said from a person with that background, or this is then said by somebody else, and you really need to triangulate or interpret the data more than just a kind of one level code and just describe it. Then I think we may be taking some of the quality away from the qualitative data of what the analysis could be, right? So again, I think it really depends on the topic, where the next person may not be able to actually gain an in-depth understanding as you would have if you have the full transcript or the full kind of demographics of the participant or those kind of things.
Last call for questions or comments. If not, please join me in thanking Andreza for presenting today. Great job, Hada Banks. First presentation in English.
Yeah.
I have so. Very good. All right. So a reminder, we do the qualitative focus sessions every month, but these meetings do go on every Tuesday. And in fact, there is an opportunity, I think there's a gap in our schedule for next Tuesday. If anybody wants to present on some work they're doing or an interesting article, you are most welcome. All right, thanks again and have a nice day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.